So I am, you gotta be careful what you wish for. Is it still coming through, or is it, up, better? All right. You have to be careful what you wish for. I took over chairmanship of the National Sheep Improvement Program a few years ago, probably like 5 years ago, and it was a lot of work, and I wasn't getting the rest of my job done. And so I lobbied some industry allied people and ended up able to hire somebody full-time to do that. And he wasn't able to be here today. And he's actually getting an award in Wisconsin for his work through NSIP and through his work from the Dairy Sheep Research Center in Spooner, Wisconsin. But last year we ran him pretty hard. I think he was in 30 states and was in 100 meetings or something like that, and was all over the place. And he wasn't quite getting the job done at home, in the office, and because he was traveling so much and out and about and everything. And I sent an email out to the NSIP board saying, all right, Rusty cannot travel as much anymore. We need our board to step up and give presentations to represent it. And the first chance of a meeting that he couldn't go to, I was at. So I had to actually, put my money where my mouth is and speak on the National Sheep Improvement Program instead of Rusty being here. But it is a topic that's fairly easy for me because I did do his job before he started doing it 3 years ago. And so I have all these slide sets together. And this is, in my opinion, one of the top 5 technologies that the sheep industry has not adopted in the last 30 years that's had the biggest negative impact on total production across the industry. So the National Sheep Improvement Program is, it's a national program. It represents all breeds of sheep and meat goats and produces estimated breeding values, which is the equivalent of EPDs of the beef industry. And it'd be hard to argue that the EPDs of the beef industry haven't had a substantial positive impact on their level of production, from reducing, calving dystocia to improving carcass traits and growth traits and efficiency traits and a whole bunch of different things. And this is a technology that, it's one of those things is, when I was an undergrad, I talked about it in a lecture one day, but I never really saw it. It wasn't there. And then it went another 6-8 years of education before I came around to it again. And to me, I have to see things, feel things, touch things before I can really quantify it and understand how it works. And I was in Montana and went to a ram sale. Had to go to the same ram sale 3 times. And they were selling the same sheep, same breed, same breeding values before I really appreciated what was going on. I went there the first time and I'm like, why are people paying so much money for these rams? Like, they just look like a regular old ram. I don't get it. I don't understand. And so I went through 1 year of quandary. The second year of, okay, everybody's looking at these books and reading all the numbers. Mind you, I have 2 degrees in animal science already at this point. And they're going through all this stuff, and then, certain ones are getting a lot of money for, and it has nothing to do with the way they look. There is no phenotype that would explain why they were paying more or less for certain animals, and these are ranchers. And I'm like, okay, dang, they're smarter than me. I've got to figure this out. And so by the 3rd year, I really understood it. I graduated, went to North Dakota State, and then a year or 2 in, I thought, you know what, I really need to invest more into NSIP. We enrolled our flocks at NDSU into this program, and I took over as chairman because I think Montana had done a great job of implementing it in their sector. Iowa had done a good job of implementing it there. But outside of that, there wasn't a whole lot of implementation around the country. So I took on leadership of this organization, and we've made a massive push to make it more known across the country on how it works. So what is it? It is a profit-driven genetic selection tool. So if you're a commercial sheep producer, this is a tool that will definitely have the ability to increase your profits. And how does it do that? It provides predictable, economically important genetic evaluation information to the sheep industry by converting performance records into relevant decision-making tools. Okay, it took 7 PhDs, 2 hours to come up with that. So, it's great, isn't it? All right, so what does it really mean? Well, how do you use this technology? So, if you look in a pen of 2 rams, and one of them had a weaning weight EBV of 0, which would be breed average. We use Australia to compute the values because the American beef industry, each of the breed associations are so big, they have geneticists and technicians and people that do all the computation side of things. Our American sheep breed associations just don't have the size and scale to be able to do that. So we contract this out to Australia to do it. As such, we get kilograms instead of pounds. It'd be better if we all use the metric system anyways, but we have to learn to convert. Anyways, the weaning weight EBV for this ram is 4.5 pounds, and that one is 0. Obviously, if you look at the 2 of them, one looks better than the other, it looks better, it looks bigger, but is it bigger because it was born earlier? Is it bigger because it was fed better? Is it bigger because it was raised as a single where the other one was raised as a triplet? Those are all factors that we don't know and we can't visually see, you know, and if we get all the raw data, it's hard to sort through all of it. This program takes all of those known factors that we know influences an animal's growth rate and takes them all away and just puts them in one number that science, time and time, proven again, has shown us to be predictable and reliable. So this ram, if we put him on ewes, his daughters are gonna be half that. They're gonna produce half as again more, right? Because their genetics are only coming from him, or half of the genetics of their lambs only coming from him. So they're gonna be, you know, 4.25 pounds, or 2.25 pounds heavier than that ram over there, okay? Or 2.25 kilograms heavier. So you'd multiply that by 2, you know, 2.2 to get pounds to kilograms, so you get pretty close back to 4.5. So actually, because an EBV and an EPD are different, all these numbers, and you're like, what the heck is he talking about? End of the day, that ram's daughters are going to be about 4 pounds heavier than that ram's daughters at weaning. That's what the technology tells you. So if you're like, I'm going to put him on 50 ewe lambs, or 50 ewes, so I'm going to get 50 lambs. Actually, I'm going to get 75 lambs, right? Because I'm producing 150% lamb crop, not 100% lamb crop. So I've got 75 lambs, and they all weigh 4 pounds heavier, so I take 75 and I multiply it times 4. That's how much more money I can afford to buy this ram versus that ram and still break even. But that's I'm breaking even the first year, right? The next year he's going to do it again. Hopefully he lives for 4 years, and I multiply that number again times 4. That's how much more money I can pay for him. But then I'm going to keep his daughters, and their daughters are going to be heavier. And so, yeah, it's hard to actually come up with a number, but it gives you a relevant decision going, okay, because sometimes this one might have higher number of or weaning weight than this one, just because he was raised as a triplet, maybe they didn't feed real good, and so it takes the visual a bit away from you. You still have to visually look at an animal, but it helps provide more information. So, and it provides you more information because it's better of the average, right? Because everybody feeds a little bit differently, everybody manages a little bit differently, and so we want animals that outperform in whatever management plan they're in. So you have an entire lamb crop, you average them all, those that did better than the others are genetically superior, hopefully. Okay, so better than average. And then it's adjusted based on age of the ewe, age of the lamb, and litter size. Right, so we know that twins grow at about 85% the rate of singles. Right, so we'll take our twins, divide it by 0.85 to get them back to level playing field with a single. All right, we also know that if a lamb is gaining a half a pound a day and one is born, 2 weeks after the other, well, he's 7 pounds behind the other one, just sheer knowing that they're going to gain a half pound a day. And one was born 2 weeks in a row. So it takes all of that information and then kind of adjusts it all so that you get it. Plus, it takes lots of data. right? So we get their weaning weight, we get their post-weaning weight, we get their yearling weight, and then it compares that to all genetically related animals, right? So I ended up getting a PhD, right? So if my sister got a master's degree and my brother's got a PhD, as a family, we're genetically predisposed to be highly educated, right? But if I got a PhD and my brother and sister never finished junior high, then, you know, as an average within our family, we're not as genetically predisposed to higher education. So it takes all of the genetic linkages in their parents and their all of the everything that they're linked to and links it all together, and that's where we're getting that good sire dam sibling performance. All right. So again, you're like, Reid, I don't understand. It's not kind of making a whole lot of sense. So if you're a visual person like me, I like figures and charts. So if you took the weaning weight of all of the lambs and you put it and adjusted for the age that they were born, singles, twins, you know, a 3-year-old ewe is not going to do as good a job of raising the lamb as a 6-year-old ewe. You put it all into one little pie chart or one little graph here. This is kind of what it would look like. You would have high performers, average performers, and low performers, right? And if we just we send these to town, these may stay, may go. These are probably where we're picking our genetic, our animals, our replacement animals, our rams that we're keeping back. Over time, we're going to move this window forward. Okay, so if their normal weaning weight is 58 pounds, right? If we keep using this technology over 4 or 5 years, it's probably going to go up to like 65 pounds, right? We made a shift in genetic selection over time. And I'm just saying weaning weight, there's a lot more traits that are out there. There's birth weight, which not a big issue in sheep and goats. We have some dystocia problems, but it's normally from overfeeding bigger sheep. Most of the times with twins, we don't have a whole lot of dystocia issues. But we want to increase weaning weights because that's pounds that we sell or heavier lambs going into a feeding system. And then this technology has the ability to measure maternal weaning weight, which, as I think about it, is like milk production. So it takes all the known variables and it does a prediction for growth rate, but the lamb is actually heavier than the program predicted it to be at weaning. Then it goes, well, that must have been because the mother was a better milker, right? So maternal milk production, how that all works, I have no idea, but I have faith in my geneticists that they do this appropriately. Post-weaning weight, which is more like 120 to 150 days of age, could be our market weight, could be a weaning weight depending on your management. And then yearling weight, are we increasing adult size or are we just increasing rate of growth and holding adult size steady? Those are the growth traits, and we've got reproductive traits. Number of lambs born nationally. If we want to increase lamb crop, we have to have more lambs hit the ground. All right, so we can increase lambs born, but if they're having quads, but they're not raising but one lamb, that doesn't do us any good. So we need to make sure that we're selecting for those that are weaning a higher lamb crop, which this program can do. It can also measure carcass traits, loin eye depth, fat depth, which, you know, we want leaner animals so we can go to heavier weights before they reach a carcass weight. But from a maternal side, too lean may be not such a great thing. So we might actually select for increased fat depth to improve maternal performance. That's your own prerogative. But a big one is parasite resistance. This is something that the Katahdin Association has grabbed the bull by the horns with and made a lot of progress, and I'll get to that in a minute. But if we measure worm egg count in animals, we can select for those that keep a lower worm egg count over time. Wool traits, we can increase our fleece weight, decrease our fiber diameter, increase staple length, all things that increase value of that fleece. And then we have indexes to make it easier because all of those traits can get to be overwhelming. So based on breed types, there's indexes. And if you have some questions, we can go into those in a minute. Okay, so this is what I would love to have seen over the last 28 years. All right, from 1990 to 2015, the ewe inventory went down by 55%, but production of lamb went up by 43%. Where is this from? Australia, okay? Yeah, they have bought into this type of technology, and I'm not saying that this did all of that rate of improvement. You know, some of it they're doing crossbreeding, some of it is because they're running less wethers and they're selling more lambs, but they've bought in hook, line, and sinker to this technology, and it has really had a massive impact on their ability to produce more with less. And we have that capability. I mean, the Americans are the ones that generated this technology to begin with. It happened here, and they adopted our technology and ran with it. Okay? Here's a ram buying guide. You can find this at nsip.org, and it kind of walks through a step-by-step guide of evaluating your level of performance and where you want to be making steps forward towards, and what traits to select for. One of the things whenever I talk about NSIP is people go, that's a lot of work, and I'm a commercial operation. I don't want to deal with all that. And I agree with you completely. This is not a program that is meant to everybody to be involved in. This is a program for our seed stock producers. If you're selling rams or replacement ewes out to the industry, that's the people that enroll into NSIP, produce genetics that have superior performance for commercial producers, and you as a commercial producer, all you do is go buy from someone who is invested in this technology, and you reap all the benefits. And I'll tell you, there's a lot of people that are in it, and they don't ask absorbent amounts either. They're pretty reasonable in prices. Now, yes, you can go buy them at the sale barn cheaper, but we all know what you get in that sometimes. All right, so if you're a person in NSIP, you don't only sell the commercial flocks, you're going to have animals that are going to sell to other NSIP flocks, and then we will have multiplier flocks. So people that are maybe selling a bunch of ewe lambs out into the commercial industry, but again, they're not going to really want to go through all the data management steps, and so what they would do is buy the top end of genetics from NSIP flocks, put them on good commercial ewes, and then sell them to commercial flocks and say these are F1s, if you will, from the genetics back to these EBVs for those certain traits. Okay, so you can be in any one of these different categories if you'd like, and are still participating in the greater benefit to the entire industry. So what do we get? When genetic selection is slow, typically we get about 1% annual gain per trait per year. Right, so it takes 10 years to get a whole lot of progress. Some traits are highly heritable than others. And we get more gains early because we're not making genetic change. We're just identifying the superior genetics that are there already, you know, and getting rid of the rest. And then we start refining those over time. As we start doing multi-trait selection for maternals, you know, for maternals, we want weaning weight, we want number of lambs weaned. If we're a wool breed, fleece weight, fiber diameter, or fecal egg count. Matt, how hard is it to get a ewe to produce heavier lambs, more milk, smaller body size, smaller fiber diameter, more wool, and parasite resistance? It's a miracle, right? So we can make progress, but it takes a person's lifetime to do all of those in one deal. And so we need that person's lifetime to pass to the next. And if we all start working together, we can make some of those steps forward. Terminal sires are going to have a different set of things that they're going to select for. More on the post-weaning growth weights, more on carcass, more on fat, more on fecal egg count. Those are things that are more important to that breed. All right, so it works. And it's worked for the people that have used it. So the Targees got on this from inception and have stayed on it throughout. And so this graph here shows the total pounds of production per ewe per year. So number of lambs born times an 85-pound lamb at weaning, plus weaning weight, EBV, plus milk production EBV, plus fleece weight EBV. So that's what she sells at the end of the year. A lamb and her wool. Okay? In the last 10 years, you know, from inception to 2005, they didn't make a lot of progress. They were enrolling it and using it, but they were still skeptical and using visual as their main thing. Around this time period, they're like, this works, and really bought into it at that point in time. And their rate of gain has gone way up. In the last 10 years, a ewe herself is producing over 10 pounds more product per year in lamb and wool. And that's a feat. The polypays, similar story, number of lambs weaned times the smaller weaning weight, 65 pounds weaning weight, EBV, maternal weaning weight, milk production, over 10 pounds more lamb produced per year. Okay? So if you got 1,000 of them and they're all producing an extra 10 pounds, that's 10,000 pounds a lamb. That's $2 a pound. That's $20,000 per year because of using technology. It can make a huge difference. The suffix, you can see the blue line is weaning weight. The red line is post-weaning weight. Rapid rates of gain. They had really bought into it early on. So in 2005, they were 3 kilograms heavier. By 2016, they're 6.5 kilograms heavier than breed average before. All right, so they're growing fast, but often when we get fast-growing sheep, they're producing less muscle as a percentage of body weight. But that's not true because they're multi-trait selection for carcass traits as well. The blue line is loin eye depth. So loin eyes, we're getting deeper, larger loin eyes, and then less fat. So less fat means we can take those lambs to heavier weights before they get to yield grade 3s and 4s. And so we even get more pounds out of them at the end because we can take them to heavier weights. All right. The Katahdin breed bought into this. They really focused on reproductive traits for the first 10 or 15 years, but reproduction and growth are negatively correlated with parasite resistance. So if we get a really fast-growing animal, often they're more susceptible to internal parasites. And so that's what we saw when we started taking fecal egg counts in the mid-2000s, is they had higher fecal egg counts than those that weren't genetically selected for improved growth and reproductive performance. But once you started measuring for it, so we didn't get access to worm count EBVs until 2009. So once they start getting those breeding values for it, the breed, as an average, started going down very rapidly. Okay, so they got rid of that negative attributes that comes from growth to parasite resistance, and that's a breed average. These aren't individual animals. That's an entire breed average that is enrolled in the program, and so we have certain animals that are even better at it. During this time, though, they didn't give up performance. So they're still producing about 7 pounds more lamb while being more parasite tolerant. I mean, these things really have an impact on commercial production. And so I'm zipping through this pretty quick. I talked a lot before. I'm getting tired of listening to myself, and I'm sure you are as well. But these are, I'm going to show you a couple of slides that are real-world purchases. So this is a ram that I purchased myself. You know, I don't promote anything that I don't do myself. I don't promote lamb if I don't eat it. I don't promote wool if I don't wear it. And I don't promote this type of technology if I don't do it myself. So here's a ram that I purchased. Actually, I got him really cheap because I'm a cheap person. The one I wanted to buy that had as good breeding values sold before him, and he looked better. But at $1,000, I'm like, God darn it. You know, and I quit, and luckily I got the one that was right after him for $350, and he didn't look as pretty, but he had the same breeding values, and I trust in these breeding values. But just to give you a frame of mind, so this is the ram that I bought. Number of lambs born is a positive 21%. That means that his daughters are going to produce a 10% larger lamb crop than a ram of similar breed type, right? But the ewes that I have are producing around 140% lamb crop, and the base that he started from is 180. So this is 20% above 180, so this is a 200% lamb crop. So I fully expect that his daughters are going to be 25-30% higher lambing rate over their lifetime than if I'd have got something at breed average. Okay, that was my primary selection goal. I was looking at that as the main thing. And then I want to look at everything else. His ribeye area was 3.29. It was 105% of ratio, so he's above average. His post-weaning growth is 2.8 kilograms, so his daughters or his lambs are going to be 3 pounds heavier at weaning. At, you know, if you're weaning them at 120 days of age, he is going to be 7 kilograms or 7 pounds heavier, so they are going to be heavier than average, so we are going to increase frame size some. But fleece weight, 8.5 pounds or 8.5% heavier fleece weight than breed average. Fiber diameter is 1 fiber diameter above average, so he's going to be a little bit coarser, so his average is around 20. This ram's going to be around 21, but that's still $7 a pound clean, so pretty marketable product. And staple length's 4.9 millimeters longer. This range index says 106, so if all of that was confusing to you before, this is an economic index, and that means that his daughters are going to produce $6 more annually than the average sheep. So if you just want to go off that index, that's fine. I prioritize where I need to make the most gain. All right, so I bought him primarily on number of lambs born. And, you know, he was a decent sheep, and he was cheap. You know, decent sheep that's cheap. Those are two things that I like, sheep and cheap. All right, and then I sheared him the other day, you know, and he had over 4 inches staple length, right? And it actually graded 20 microns, and it was 12.5 pounds, and he's not a big sheep. And it's going to be, we tested it at 70% yield. So 12.5 pounds at 70% yield is 8.5 pounds of clean fibers at $7 a pound clean. So he sheared $56 worth of wool. His daughters aren't going to shear quite that much, but they're moving in that direction. You know what the state average fleece weight is for use? 6.5 pounds. The grease yield, the state average in Texas for yield is 50%. So they're producing 6.5 pounds of greasy wool. That's like 3.25 pounds of clean fibers. So he's more than doubled the clean fiber production of that. I'm not saying that's all. I'm not saying that I did everything right. I'm just saying that these are quantifiable numbers that can make a big difference. 3 pounds of clean fibers that are 20 microns is worth $7. That's $21 a fleece. You know, this one is over twice that. Okay, his daughters, what do you expect, Matt? If a ram is shearing 12.5 pounds of wool on an annual basis, what's his daughters going to shear? 9. So, you know, it's 2 to 3 pounds more than state average, you know, but at heavier yield, I'm still almost twice the pounds of clean fibers. All right, so this is technology that can have an impact bottom line. Let's hope his daughters do have that higher lamb crop. Here is the Texas Sheep and Goat Expo. You know, Matt had brought some sheep down last year for that. We had Rambouillets that sold as well. But here were some of the Katahdins that were in that sale. We actually had to scratch 3 of them, so only 4 ended up making the sale. But it might be hard to see some of these numbers, but I'll just go through this. All of these ram lambs were either twins or triplets. They're all, for maternal milk production, they're going to put on an extra 0.5 pound to 1 pound of lambs at weaning. They're going to give you 1.5 pounds to 3 pounds more at weaning from growth, right? 1.5 pounds to 3 pounds plus an extra 0.5 pound here. At post-weaning, they're 3 to 6 pounds heavier depending on which ram you decide to buy. Their weaning worm egg count is 20 to 40% reduction in parasite load at weaning. Weaning is less heritable than post-weaning because maternal milk can have an influence on whether they pick up parasites or not. Post-weaning, which is 120 to 150 days of age, we're at negative 44 to negative 65% worm egg count. So essentially, if you can drop your worm egg count by 50%, you don't see clinical cases anymore, unless you're just starving them out on pasture. If you give them that genetic push to be able to resist parasites, so they're growing faster, or less parasites, and then we come over here to number of lambs weaned, and we're somewhere between 15 and 20% higher number of lambs weaned. And so these are things that you said we can never do individually without doing multi-trait selection, 4 or 5 different traits all in once. But if you use this powerful tool and you dedicate to it for a long time, you can really have an impact. The economics of it, their economics is saying that these daughters from those rams are going to generate you about $7 to $9 more per year, and that does not include parasite resistance. So if you don't have a 10% death loss because of parasites, if you don't, have to drench and be out there and spending that money drenching them and have a loss in production because they're struggling with parasites, that's an even higher number. And so again, I'm not promoting that. I'm not promoting the guy that sold me the other ram. I'm promoting the technology. It can really have a positive impact on the industry moving forward. So with that, National Sheep Improvement Program is America's genetic foundation for a profitable sheep industry. I know it's hard to get through all that. It took me a good 10 years to really understand it, so I don't expect you to get it in 30 minutes. Of course, you're probably all a lot sharper than I am. It just takes me longer to beat these things in. So anyways, I told you I wasn't going to take an hour, a half hour. You didn't have to end break soon. 15 minutes for questions. Questions?
Reid,
Yes.
can you use these genetic trait estimators across breeds then? Do you have, is it in the makings that we can take a terminal sire onto a maternal breed, and is it all comparable?
So if you're using a terminal sire against another, if you're comparing 2 terminal sires against one another, yes. That between the 2 different breeds, it's pretty close. All the terminal sires run in the same data set. So if we get more genetic linkages across those breeds within that data set, we can more clearly define that. But it's pretty close. If you're using terminal sire. Now, if you're using, a polypay versus a targy weaning weight, yeah, that's not going to work. We don't have those crossbreed comparisons yet. And those are run in different sets, but the Rambouillet or targy, now those are run in the same data set, and we're getting more genetic linkages, so we're getting closer to that to know what that is. But this does not say that you don't use crossbreeding. We want to use these pure lines to create crossbreds that we continue to use, or we create composites from this and then start anew with that. So, you have a lot of easy cares in the state. It's a great composite breed, but moving forward, if you don't use a technology like this and you start doing single trait selection, you're going to move that composite breed back towards whatever breed brought that primary trait that you're selecting for. Back into, I don't know if that answers your question or not, but because like in beef cattle, they're doing more of that work trying to do crossbreed stuff, and I would need a geneticist to get more clear, but within breed, it's pretty close, crossbreed types. No. Yes?
Does NSIP take into account already the heritability factors for all these traits? Or if I'm a commercial breeder, I'm going to be maybe buying NSIP rams. Does NSIP already work in those heritability factors?
Heritability is in the equation to generate an estimated breeding value.
Okay.
So for traits like fiber diameter or fleece weight, those are highly heritable traits. You can make progress quickly.
Right.
Lowly heritable traits like number of lambs weaned, it takes longer to make progress and change your EBVs because the heritability is like a 0.1. So you actually have to take your difference in performance times 0.1 to get that EBV. And then the more data you put into it, the closer that we can predict true breeding value, so it'll go up. But yes, absolutely, heritabilities are a big part of an EBV.
Okay.
I was wondering, do you take into account for pounds weaned along with the number of lambs weaned? As far as, even if you have a set of twins, do you guys look at what you'd expect that you to wean off in pounds even with twins? as opposed to, or is that correlated with, adjusted for singles to twins and all that?
So the growth traits are adjusted for litter size. And then, some of those that I showed you that was total pounds produced, that I'm taking multiple EBVs and putting them together and blending them into one. You don't actually see that. You would look at growth and reproduction in one, and so you would select rams that you're going to purchase based on each of those independently. If you didn't want to do that, then you just go to the index, and the index kind of has all that built into one. I don't know, does that answer your question?
Kind of. I guess my question was, okay, for example, I had a lamb that it was a single, weaned it off at 6 weeks at 50 pounds. Had another have a set of twins, weaned off 79 pounds with the twins. I didn't know how you'd adjust for that.
So if you were looking for, your weaning weight, breeding value is, yes, that single is probably going to it's going to wean heavier based off of average because it was a single, and then the twins are going to wean lower than predicted based on the breeding values because they're probably nutritionally stressed a little bit. They're not getting as much feed, but if you average the two of them, it should hit spot on at that prediction.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
So yeah, I get what you're asking now is, it's kind of the average of the lambing rate within that breed, yeah. Yes, sir.
Hey, Reid, as in cattle, if your growth rate and carcass characteristics are antagonistic to reproductive values, is it the same in sheep? In other words, could you get your ewe flock too big, just like the cattle herd is?
Yes, absolutely. Those antagonistic traits are things that are built in. So if you just select for increased growth rate, even if you don't measure your carcass traits via ultrasound, they will go down because we know that there's a negative correlation between the two of them. So to make progress in both of them, you have to measure both of them. Related to reproduction, I mean, my census is why do we invest a lot of time and effort measuring carcass traits on a maternal breed? Let the terminal sire take care of that side of the things. You might measure carcass traits on a maternal side just to cull off your really, really poor end, but especially for a wool breed, when we're selecting for milk production and growth rate and weaning rate and fleece production, why add carcass into that unless you're just culling off the bottom so that we're not increasing fleece size of the animal and reproduction goes down. The Western Range Index actually has a negative placement on yearling weight. So as yearling weight goes up, the index keeps getting pushed down. And what it's trying to do is hold yearling weight steady and have growth rate go up. And so we have faster growing, earlier maturing sheep that don't get too big and then take too much feed to keep reproduction at maximal. At maximal potential. So that index is trying to do that, but a lot of people don't like it because there are some people that would want bigger sheep, but that also comes with a bigger feed bill.
But if sheep are 15% more efficient than cattle are, is it as dramatic?
I can't answer that one. It has an impact. Smaller sheep are more fertile across the board. I mean, we see that. And that doesn't mean you can't breed big, fertile sheep, but you need to be breeding for both when you do that. Yes?
I'm looking at some data on some rams that are considered. What is
SRC
SRC?
is an Australian index, self-replacing carcass. So it's kind of like a Carcass Plus index where we want faster rate of gain and improved carcass traits, but in that index it also puts in, I believe, fecal egg count and reproductive rate. And so the premise behind it is if you were going to use a terminal sire and then keep those F1s back, that those F1s would be a pretty good female in addition to being a terminal sire carcass. But Australia doesn't put near the pressure on reproductive rate than we do here. And so if you go to their website, sheepgenetics.org.au, if you want to, shoot me an email and I can send you their index weightings, and it tells you which trait is weighted the most. So I remember looking at it, but I don't remember the specifics of it. I'd have to go look at it again to tell you. Yes. Most all indexes are higher the better. Right. And that brings up a good point, is we've created a search tool now at nsip.org where you can go in any type of breed and go search the entire database for certain traits and sort based on certain traits and put parameters in and walk through and go find the type of sheep that you're looking for. It'll tell you where they're produced and who sired it and who's the dam and who owns it, or who bred it, maybe not who owns it yet. You have to track that down yourself. I think Matt had a question. Do you have a question, Matt? Just a comment. Yes.
When we go in to look at these, look for an NSIP ram, is all this data collected is it on the flock itself, or is it within, is that individual compared against the whole industry? Or the whole breed that is NSIP participating with all the producers?
Right. So you have to be genetically linked to be in. And so when breeders get a report back, it'll say if they're genetically linked or not. And that means did they sell rams to other people that are in the program that are testing their genetic merit within other flocks. So it is definitely a cross-flock comparison study. And if you're not well linked enough, you don't get put into the main database. And I don't remember which pieces there are. And so you can get linked for growth, for reproduction, for parasites, for carcass. And so there's different levels of linkages that you have to get to. But the program is definitely robust enough to do cross-flock comparisons.
And if I can add something, it's also the way the linkages work, and it's similar, it's almost exactly the same as it is in cattle, but we're part of a project where we had a ram at a flock in Montana, and so did a breeder from South Dakota. We've never used each other's genetics. And over 50 years, I don't think we've ever had each other's genetics in our flocks. But we're genetically linked for growth traits right now with the flock in South Dakota. And we should be on wool traits whenever the sheep from the project get submitted and ran an NSIP. I mean, so that's how it works. So once you get, if you're buying an NSIP ram, one of the things you want to do is ask them if they're linked. And it takes about 5 years actually to get linked, unless you're real aggressive at it. But once you are, it's just like the cattle deal. I mean, you can compare cattle from western Kansas to Alabama to North Dakota to Montana, and the numbers are all the same, and NSIP does the same thing.
Yeah, the Targhee breeders from the beginning, they moved rams around. They had 3 or 4 rams that went to multiple different flocks to get started, and then as it became more popular, they kind of have one main centralized ram sale, and then the breeders within each other are going to compete to get some of those top, and then it moves around. So there's groups that work together, and if I'm buying from somebody, I'm going to buy from people that are in a group working together, because there's thousands and thousands of animals that are tested every year to generate that breeding value. Whereas if I have somebody who's all on his own island doing his own thing, they're not linked in. The Polypays had a Mount Rushmore consortium, and they had a very strategic method where anytime someone produced a ram that had an index higher than his father, he automatically was put into a pool and got moved around from flock to flock, and they maintained 6 sire lines, and it moved around, and so they worked with geneticists to get that done. The Katahdins, work together, but there's some that focus on parasites and some that don't, and so they have their own groups that still move genetics around. The Rambouillets have done a lot of genetic linkages. One guy but he have 6 different cooperators rams that he used in 1 year, and within one flock. And And then the experiment station has also in Idaho has done that, and the Suffolk breeders have moved rams around. And so those, and those that are way up there that have really high values are linked into other flocks, because that means there's more data going in. When more data goes in, EBVs separate more, up or down.
Reid, I've got a question for you. I'm a polypay breeder with an accelerated flock. I've been on NSIP, and entering my data, I get all these errors about a ewe that lambs twice in 1 year. And I've kind of gotten discouraged with it because my number of lambs born, number of lambs weaned really don't reflect the 6 lambs I get every 2 years out of my ewes. And I was wondering what NSIP has done to correct that.
So we have worked with Australia to get them to revise their system. We've looked at trying to do an out-of-season breeding EBV, but it's pretty daunting to do because of the contemporary groups that you need and as many animals that don't breed out of season. I won't get into the details, but they have a flaw in their system that's it's a fail-safe to where if an animal lambs more than once in a year, they think it's an error in the data set.
Right.
And so the animal's offspring still go in, but the reproductive event does not get measured. When it's the second reproductive event within a calendar year, doesn't influence the breeding values for number of lambs born, number of lambs weaned.
I know. So I get dinged for 2 lambs every 2 years. I get, my ewes show twins, twins, when in fact they've gone twins, 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 and I'm producing 2 sets of triplets in 2 years, but I don't get credit for those 2 extra lambs. So when I try to compete with other polypay breeders, my number of lambs born and number of lambs weaned just never can compete with that.
Right. Well, you know, I understand where you're coming from, and now lambing twice, you shouldn't get credit for 4 lambs in a year if they lamb twice, because that would be misleading. That number of lambs weaned would be exponentially higher, because most people are going to look at that and think that's a lambing event within a year, not 2 lambing events within a year. Now, the disadvantage to lambing twice in a year is the stress of having 2 lambs in a year may pull back their production. So instead of having triplets in the spring, they have a set of twins because she had a set of twins in the fall still. So that would pull back your level of production. So your breeding value could be a bit lower because it's not accounting for the fact that they lamb twice in the same year. But if you can get enough genetics spread out to other flocks that don't do that, it should come out in the wash long term. So I wish we could fix it. We've worked with them, we've pushed them to do it, but there's not, they're on numbers. And so they say, okay, we'll go back and look and see how many registered breeders in NSIP are doing this, and it's too small a fraction for them to make major changes into the database. And I wish I could do something different about it. If we could lobby, you know, the government to set aside $2 million so we had our own data processing center instead of going to Australia, then we could solve this quickly. But we just don't have the ability to do it at this point in time.
So what's your recommendation to flocks like mine that are accelerated and want to be on NSIP?
So, I mean, recognize how the program impacts the data that you're putting in and try to work with some other breeders that aren't, so that you have your data print is not just within your flock, that there's enough of your genetics that are spread out into others that aren't doing that same accelerated system, so that the breeding values are more reflective of what their true breeding value is and aren't being influenced by that out-of-season lambing event.
I mean, I purchase other NSIP rams,
Right.
not necessarily accelerated. So I'm linked to other flocks,
Right.
but it's still hurting my numbers. So if I go to the Center of the Nation sale, somebody looks at my rams and says, well, her numbers aren't there.
Right.
We don't want those rams.
So, I mean, there's people that are going to play the numbers game, and it's good to an extent because it puts pressure on people to get really high numbers. But I still think if you're a commercial producer, you have to have faith in the seed stock supplier that you're getting those from. And so trust in their program and buy the best that they produce. So if you have a clientele base that wants an out-of-season breeding, and just, recognize that they should buy the highest within your flock because you're putting pressure on out-of-season breeding. And just try to get them to understand that some of your numbers may be a little bit lower because you're lambing more than one event in the year. But regardless who you're buying from, you have to have confidence in that person that you're buying from, because they're in a management system that's similar to what you want to.
I think we talk about that, back to earlier this morning where you talked about hitting those market targets. For me as a commercial producer, I have so much value in that out-of-season breeding. Because I can dictate the outcome of that by doing that. If you're a seasonal, then you're no different than the rest of the world, And then you can put on top of that differences in how you raise those lambs on top of the genetics there. You can just about favor a set of sheep to the market.
Right.
So a commercial producer, even though the numbers aren't there for a sheep, that has so much value.
Right. But then it still has value for you that she stays in the program. So you're buying from her. That's who your source seed stock is. But then having those EBVs within her flock still adds value to your purchasing decision.
What I would be concerned about is her buying sheep that don't perform out of season. That's where I'd be concerned.
Yeah.
So they are out.
Right.
And they eventually will, they're still doing some good for you.
So, not to interrupt good conversation, continue the conversation, please, but we have about a 10-minute break.